That's not supposed to happen. Oh, yes, someone probably noticed that I hadn't started. Now we're officially streaming and recording. Okay. Thank you, probably Bonnie. Among those who make this series possible is Gary Whitehouse, who writes our press releases. So special thanks to him. Let us also thank our friends of the library group for their co-sponsorship and support of Random Review. They founded Random Review and ran it single-handedly for 30 years.
Wow.
They also have book sales.
Yes.
And the proceeds from those sales go to benefit the library and provide support to the library in many ways. You can learn more about how to join the Friends or volunteer with them at their website, friendsofthecbclibrary.org. And a web search should lead you right to them as well. On the topic of websites, to get the most out of Random Review, consider visiting our Random Review webpage, where you can find the Random Review schedule of events and a list of books related to each of the review books. This list is compiled by volunteer Gail Girdman, and links to video recordings of each event. Those videos are also on the library's YouTube channel. This year, we're streaming all the Random Review events live, so you can participate from home if that's your preference. The link for that live stream is also on the Random Review webpage. It does not change from month to month. Now then, let's get to the purpose for this gathering. Today we have invited Evan Gottlieb to review The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula Le Guin. Evan is a professor of English at Oregon State University, where he's taught for 21 years and counting. Originally from Ontario, Canada, he received his BA from McMaster University and his MA and PhD from the University of Buffalo in the State University of New York system. He's the author of 5 previous books on 18th century and Romantic era British literature, both poetry and novels, and on literary theory and criticism. A few years ago, however, his research and teaching interests began to shift toward genre fiction, especially science fiction. He developed a brand new course at OSU, English 108, Introduction to Science Fiction and Fantasy, which now regularly enrolls 100 students at a time, and completed a book on ecological theory and science fiction film that will be published in the spring in Bloomsbury's Film Theory and Practice series. He is currently writing an introduction to science fiction that will eventually appear in Routledge's long-running series, The Basics. While not teaching or writing, Evan likes spending time with his family, watching international soccer, and napping. Welcome, Evan.
All right, how's my microphone sounding? Louder? I mean, I can talk louder. Well, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for that lovely introduction. It's really a pleasure to be here and to see so many of you today. Well, there she is. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with Ursula K. Le Guin, because, of course, among other things, she not only is a nationally and internationally known author, but was also something of a local celebrity, as I'm sure most of you know, since she made her home in Portland for the majority of her career. I thought I would just, though, introduce a little bit of things about her. Born in California, born in Berkeley, but we'll forgive her for that. Her parents were an anthropologist, right? Alfred Kroeber, and that's where the K comes from, as I understand it. And her mother is the writer Theodore Kroeber. She attended Radcliffe College, did graduate work at Columbia University. She married the historian Charles A. Le Guin in Paris in 1953. It's a pretty good place to get married, I think. They lived in Portland, Oregon. They moved to Portland in '58, which is when her husband, I believe, began teaching at Portland State. And they had 3 children and 4 grandchildren. And I'm getting most of this information, of course, from Le Guin's actual website. Le Guin herself passed away in 2018. Very long and very successful and well-regarded career. Listed a couple of her best-known novels here just because I wanted to, and also just because I feel like most of the attention is often paid to her early oeuvre, and that is, I will admit, what I am most familiar with too. In the first 4 novels listed there are all from the late 1960s and early 1970s. But her career certainly spanned much longer than that. And Always Coming Home, for instance, I believe is from 1985. I will come back to what she accomplished momentarily. In fact, I thought what I would do is, I don't know if anyone else remembers who was that, like David Letterman and the top 10 lists that he used to have. So I should have started with number 10, I know, but I couldn't figure out how to get the program to start at 10 and go count down. So we'll just start at number 1, but I am attempting to go a little bit here in order. Really from sort of some general, I think, and fascinating things about her life to some specific things that I think are really significant about The Left Hand of Darkness, which is the novel that I will then talk at length about. Well, unfortunately, I put the photo. This is a photo, by the way, of Le Guin's writing corner in her Portland home. I will have to go back a slide in a second, but I did want to start with the wonderful fact that Le Guin's Portland home is currently being turned into a science fiction writers retreat. There is already an Ursula K. Le Guin Prize for Fiction. The most recent panel of judges included Margaret Atwood, who just happened to be in town last night. She was sort of the warm-up act for me. Don't tell her I said that. Omar El Akkad, Carmen Maria Machado, if those are names that are also familiar to you. Let me move back now. So yeah, this is wonderful. There's no date, as I understand it, for precisely when the writers in residence will open, because family members are currently still living in the home. But I do know that that plan is absolutely set, and no doubt it will be extraordinary experience for science fiction authors to get the chance to work on their craft surrounded by Le Guin's home. In addition to her home in Portland, she had a summer cottage in Seaside. And I know this because one of my colleagues in my department, Dr. Rebecca Olson, grew up in Seaside. And she is lucky enough to remember, she told me, she remembers being a child sitting on the floor in Le Guin's living room, listening to her read. She apparently hosted regular events where simply neighbors and friends would come and listen, I believe, to work in progress, and I think have discussions. So it's incredibly envious when I heard about that. She was also very prolific. In addition to winning the Hugo and Nebula Awards 13 times, and many more, she wrote 23 novels, 12 volumes of short stories, 11 volumes of poetry. Sorry, I think when I look up, the mic is a little less effective, so I will try to talk into it a little. 23 novels, 12 volumes of short stories, 11 volumes of poetry, 13 children's books, 5 essay collections, 4 works of translation. And again, the breadth and imagination of her work, so impressive, earning not just those 6 Nebula and 7 Hugo Awards, but also the Science Fiction Writer of America's Grandmaster title, along with the PEN Malamud Award, and many others. In 2014, she was awarded the National Book Foundation Medal for Distinguished Contribution to American Letters. And in 2016, she joined the really quite short list of authors to be published during their lifetimes by the Library of America. Number 4, no Harry Potter, no problem. Her first YA novel, Le Guin's first YA novel, fantasy novel, A Wizard of Earthsea, has sold more than 1 million copies and is treasured favorite for many who grew up with it. One person who did not admit to growing up with it was J.K. Rowling. And I read that Le Guin once said, was once asked, what do you think about the fact that Rowling never cited you as an influence or an inspiration, despite the fact that your Wizard of Earthsea series also features young wizards, a wizard in school, and questions concerning the ethical use of magic, and they predate the Harry Potter novels by several decades. Le Guin said, I don't care. She said, this apparently she said, I really don't care, but it would have been the nice thing to do to acknowledge her influence. So I thought that was a nice anecdote. All right, getting a little closer to today's novel. The Wizard of Earthsea came out in 1968, but it was really the publication of this novel, The Left Hand of Darkness, the next year that brought Le Guin significant critical and public attention. It was, in fact, her 4th science fiction novel, and the 4th to be set in her universe of the Ecumen, a loose, peaceful alliance of 80 or so planets connected via trade and the exchange of ideas. According to Wikipedia, Le Guin used the term Ecumen for her fictional alliance because she got it from her father, who, remember, was an anthropologist, who derived it in turn from the Greek, okumene, to refer to Eurasian cultures that shared a common origin. And clearly it was that sense of imagining an alternative future framed by cooperation and the exchange of ideas rather than warfare, colonization, and endless resource extraction that appealed to Le Guin very much. Now we get to number 6. And again, this is a paraphrase. Don't try to explain it to me. I won't understand anyway. That was Le Guin's response to fans who insisted on pointing out all the discrepancies between the novels set in the ecumenical universe. Again, Le Guin was not bothered by that in the slightest. In fact, this is precisely what she told those fans who tried to explain to her how she could make all of the novels and short stories agree with one another. She essentially said, this is not my concern, because my goal here, while I believe she was certainly committed to what we would call world building, but not in any sort of really picky way. For her, and this is one of the beautiful things about her work, it was the ideas that were being expressed in the novels that mattered, not necessarily whether all of the timelines matched up. Other science fiction writers have tried, right? I mean, Isaac Asimov made a big mess out of trying to get all of his foundation novels to line up with each other over time, and then the robot novels as well. So I think probably Le Guin was wise not to spend too much energy on that. All right, number 7. She told fans that she wasn't concerned about the consistency necessarily of the details between these novels, but she was very responsive to other kinds of readers' concerns and criticisms. And we'll come back to this, but I will look at this in more detail, in fact, in a moment, but I wanted to say that this is something I really admire about her. Following the initial public acclaim that The Left Hand of Darkness received upon publication, there was a critical backlash from some feminist critics over the novel's representations of gender identity. Le Guin responded with an essay from 1976, Is Gender Necessary?, that defended most of her choices in the novel. But, and this is what I really admire about her, she was also a big enough person to recognize when she had made mistakes. And in 1987, she published an annotated version of the same essay, now called Is Gender Necessary? Redux, in which she repeatedly admits to her own previous defensiveness and the validity of much of the earlier criticism that she was unwilling to accept at the time. We will take up this subject again following this top 10. Number 8, in terms of things I love about Le Guin, is the Ansible. It's a testament, I think, to Le Guin's faith in the power and purpose of communication, that the ecumen, right, the whole sort of structure of intergalactic worlds that she sets these science fiction stories in, the ecumen itself, the whole ability to sort of bring it together as a kind of league of planets, if you will, rests on the capabilities of this imaginary device, the Ansible, that allows for instantaneous communication between any two places in the universe, as long as one is located on a planet. How did it work exactly? Again, that wasn't really Le Guin's concern. Her concern was with imagining the possibilities that would be opened up by making communication, making the distance between people irrelevant to their ability to communicate with each other. And in some ways, what she anticipates is the internet, a kind of galactic internet, a kind of a universal internet, if you will. In The Left Hand of Darkness, right, this is the device that Genli Ai carries with him in his work as an envoy of the ecumen. And of course, I'll say a little bit more about that plot in a moment, but that is the jumping off point of the novel. That Genli Ai is a envoy, I believe from Terra, which of course is a version of Earth, but is not the center of the ecumenical universe, really. That honor goes to an older human sort of planetary race. But this was written in 1969. The Ansible, though, is so important to Le Guin's entire construction that 5 years later, she writes another novel, The Dispossessed, in which she returns to a time before the official establishment of the ecumen in order to tell the story of how the Ansible came to be invented. And it's a great story. In a classic case of art, of life imitating art, Ansible, though, I now know from an internet search, is the name of an open source IT automation platform that's purposely designed actually to be especially accessible to non-specialists. So clearly, somebody was inspired by the generosity of Le Guin's vision. I can't think of many writers who manage to do what Le Guin does, which is to write speculative fiction that simultaneously encourages us to empathize with and to understand divergent points of view, and yet simultaneously retains a fundamental sense of what is ethical and what is right. And then challenges readers, essentially, to do the same. Her interests in and her commitments to anthropological forms of knowledge production are apparent everywhere in her work, but they're usually worn quite lightly. You don't feel as though you're being lectured to. Always, 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 it is culture and character that interest Le Guin. Futuristic technology is present, right? There's the Ansible. There's also what she calls NAFAL space travel, NAFAL nearly as fast as light. It's pretty clever. But her interest is not in how such tech might work. It's in how it would allow humans to grow to change, to become better versions of ourselves on a variety of planets, in a variety of circumstances. The technology, in other words, is not there for its own sake. It is there as a means, as a vehicle for Le Guin to work out these questions of character and these questions of ethical behavior and these questions of, is intercultural empathy possible? In a way, then, right? I mean, what I've been talking around is the fact that, and now I'm finally getting to my 10th and first point, which is that the basic impulse of all science fiction, I think, and this is something I'm working on. I'm very open to your thoughts on. The basic impulse of all science fiction, I think, is often mistaken to be a sort of interest in futuristic technology. But I think that's really a secondary point. And that's something that Le Guin's work makes very clear, right? Le Guin famously, of course, does not write quote unquote hard science fiction, which is the sort of unofficial name for the kind of science fiction that that is in fact quite interested in trying to extrapolate from present technological conditions, future technological conditions. Her science fiction has been called soft, but I'm not in love with that term because it sounds like it might have a kind of pejorative connotation to it, and it should not. It absolutely should not. The soft refers to her interest in the people behind the technology, not the technology for its own sake. And that makes me think that Le Guin, in some ways, her science fiction is absolutely at the center of what the genre is all about. And in a sense, I mean, all fiction, for that matter, is about imagining how the world could be different. Right? Even so-called realist fiction projects a vision of the author about how the world looks to them or could look to them. I think we tend to mistake realism for a mirror being held up to reality, and it often passes itself off that way. But in fact, all fiction, in a sense, is speculative fiction. It's speculative fiction, and science fiction in particular simply make that premise clear. And I think Le Guin's writing embodies that impulse with more creativity, more generosity of spirit than just about any of her peers. Right? She does not extrapolate the future based on the present. That was too limiting for her. Instead, she imagines entirely new worlds that represent not really what we could become, but what we could have been, and perhaps what we can still be. Well, as somebody who has turned his professional attentions to science fiction in particular in the last couple of years, I have grown very fond of paperbacks, old paperbacks that often, it seems, nobody else wants, and that's fine. I'll take them. In fact, though, I just love the covers. And science fiction is an interesting genre because, unlike most other genres of writing, it's the paperbacks that tend to become more valuable over time than the hardcovers. And a lot of this is because the paperback revolution and the growth of science fiction are inextricably bound up together in some really interesting material ways. But in any case, I just wanted to take the opportunity to show off, especially on the far, what is that? It's your left, right? That makes sense, the left hand of darkness. I don't know if you can see, but the original selling price of the novel, because this is a first edition of the paperback, 95 cents. Today, it goes for about $1,000, the paperback, if it's signed. I've seen it, and I've seen it as expensive as $750, just unsigned. So if you do happen to have one of those hanging around your attic, I'll take it off your hands, I promise. Here are some of the hardcovers, by the way. Hardcovers are a little usually considered actually less valuable than the paperbacks. And of course, many science fiction novels, especially in the 60s and 70s, when Le Guin was coming into her own, didn't get paperback editions at all. Sorry, didn't get hardcover editions at all, only got paperback editions. But in this case, as you can see, there were some very beautiful editions issued in hardcover, including again, the one on the far left, which is the first British hardcover edition. And it goes for a cool $7,500 if you have a signed copy. The first American hardcover edition goes for a mere $3,200. So a little more affordable, perhaps, or perhaps not. So what makes The Left Hand of Darkness so special? Le Guin's not the first female author of science fiction to find success, right? And I do want to make that clear. Others before her, very much worth reading, include Leigh Brackett, author of The Long Tomorrow in 1955, and C.L. Moore, who often wrote with her husband, whose last name is Kuttner, and now I'm forgetting his first name. But she's well known as well for Doomsday Morning. I should mention a bit of trivia. Leigh Brackett also wrote the first script for The Empire Strikes Back. It was not the script that was used, unfortunately, perhaps, but it's still one of my favorite movies. And she does get the credit for many of the sort of original ideas that did make their way into the later script that I believe was written by Lawrence Kasdan. But what really makes Le Guin special then is not that she's the first woman to write science fiction, not far from it, but that she was among the first to introduce explicitly feminist themes into science fiction, along with Joanna Russ, whose novel The Female Man from 1975, and Marge Piercy, whose novel Woman on the Edge of Time. Sort of those three together, and Le Guin's novel precedes the other two, form this kind of triad, this kind of triangle of awareness that science fiction does not have to be implicitly masculine, and that it does not have to be simply a vehicle for, at best, technological extrapolation and determinism, and at worst, just a rewriting of earlier patriarchal and often colonial narratives. Instead, though, and Le Guin is she is quite articulate about this, and that's the quotation that I have for you here. In fact, I won't read it now, but you can hear her impatience, and you can hear her determination not to simply write more of the same, right? And she sees through a lot of it. She sees through a lot of it, right? That ultimately this is not what she wants to do, right? The Rotary Club on Alpha Centauri, that's the size of it. No offense to Rotary Club members, but Le Guin was determined to show that science fiction did not have to travel down the same well-worn paths. And I think even more than her previous novels, it's The Left Hand of Darkness and it's The Dispossessed from 5 years later, that were explicitly conceived as simultaneously an extension and a correction to the classic science fiction tradition established by male authors like Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke, and Robert Heinlein. Indeed, if you want a fascinating pairing, read Heinlein's The Moon is a Harsh Mistress from 1966, and then read Le Guin's The Dispossessed from 1974. the contrast could not be clearer. The same can be said to, I think, another interesting pairing is The Left Hand of Darkness with Stranger in a Strange Land, also by Heinlein. In my opinion, again, no contest, but I shouldn't do that. There's probably a Heinlein fan out there somewhere. Well, again, what makes Heart of Darkness, Left Hand of Darkness so special? Part of it, and I'm adapting this, of course, as you can see, I'm giving credit to Frederick Jameson, the great and just recently deceased literary critic, who notes that in many ways, part of what's so amazing about the book is that it's not just one book. It's multiple books in one. He called it, in fact, Jameson called it a virtual anthology of narrative strands of different kinds of speculative fiction, and not just speculative fiction. For instance, it's a travel narrative, right? And travel narratives are one of the oldest forms of narrative, right? Leading to some of the earliest examples of the English novel. Robinson Crusoe, Gulliver's Travels in the satiric vein. This is, of course, the story of Genly Ai's adventures on the foreign planet of Gethin. It also doubles as a fictional anthropological study, right? Many, and this takes place in many of Le Guin's novels. Many of her characters, and I think again we see the influence of her intellectual family upbringing here. Many of her characters play sort of anthropological roles, or they have anthropological interests. They're curious about the foreign cultures and planets that they're exploring. That curiosity rubs off on us. In this case, much of The Left Hand of Darkness is presented as the working journal of Genly Ai, as he records his experiences and occasionally other tales and information that he picks up. Eventually, the narrative does also expand to include the perspective, a first-person narrative written by Estraven, who becomes the other sort of principal protagonist of the novel. And of course, it's the relationship, the developing relationship between Genly Ai and Estraven that forms so much of the characterological interest of the novel. But we get all kinds of interesting ethnographic forms. We get reports from earlier missions to Gethin. We get descriptions of the Gethinians' unique sexual physiology, which I'm going to turn to briefly. We get transcriptions by Genly Ai of various folk tales and spiritual traditions. We also get some highly entertaining footnotes. And I love the fact that there are footnotes, and there's also appendices to the book written by Le Guin that try to set out the Gethinian calendar and clock, for instance. But in this case, I particularly like the footnote on page 133 of this edition. And this is a chapter told to Genly Ai not by Estraven, but about an earlier ancestor of Estraven's, told by someone who is from Gethin. And Gethin is known as the winter planet because it's always winter there in some form or another. So I particularly like this footnote where Le Guin explains that the air, we're told, the air was Kurem, K-U-R-E-M, and that's in italics, right? And it's clearly a sort of native term from the Gethinian language of some kind, either Orgorian or in this case probably Kardish. And those are the two main states on the planet that Genly Ai finds himself going back and forth between. The air was Kurem. Kurem, the footnote tells us, is damp weather, 0 to minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Damp. There's much more to be said here. I don't want to go on at too much length. The mythological elements. Pastiche there, by the way, is not meant to be a derogatory term. In this case, the mythological pastiche means I think is meant to gesture towards the way in which Le Guin very purposefully draws on a variety of traditions, including, of course, non-Western traditions, to which she was quite drawn in the course of sort of creating this world with its various stories. It is also very much a political novel, right? Is it a Cold War allegory? I'm not sure. That's what my son told me. He said that that's how it was being taught to him. And I think that's interesting. And it's not hard to see, right? Because we do have these two opposing states. Right. We have Karhide, which is a monarchy overseen by a mad king, constantly embroiled in court intrigues and pomp and circumstance. And that's where Genli meets Estraven, who begins the novel as the king's sort of most trusted advisor, but quickly loses that role because of his attempts to help Genli. Of course, he also puts Genli in danger and then has to go and rescue him from the other country, Orgorian. Kind of centralized and ultimately authoritarian society with a top-down decision-making structure, with secret police, with a prison work camp. So are there parallels here between Karhide and Orgorian on the one hand, and the US and the USSR on the other hand? Absolutely. But it is so much more than that. And the parallels are not perfect, and I'm very glad they're not, because it's not, I think to say that the novel is a Cold War allegory is to reduce it unnecessarily to a historical context from which, sure, it arises, but it transcends. I'm still trying to figure out, actually, if Genli is ever really in danger in Karhide. Or does Estraven just make him think he's in danger so that he'll leave and go to Orgorian, the competitor state, where Estraven thinks they'll be more likely to believe Genli and join the Ecumen? Except he's wrong. But this would explain why Estraven feels responsible for breaking Genli out of jail. And that, of course, is a big part of the adventure story. That and their 800-mile trip together through in the most trying and extreme weather. But I'll focus now, just to conclude, I'll focus on the last of these sort of different narrative strands that I think magically Le Guin manages to bring together and to weave together. And that is that among other things, that this is also a romance. It's a romance of a kind that's actually very popular again now, a love story of enemies to friends. Perhaps, depending on how you want to think about it, even a love story of the interspecies variety. And I am, of course, talking about Genli's relationship with Estraven, because what I haven't mentioned, but I'm sure you know well, especially if you're familiar with the novel, is that what makes the inhabitants of Gethin so special is that they spend 5/6 of their time being androgynous. And only in what they call the state of Kemmering or estrus do they become temporarily male and female. You know what? I'm going to go through that. Okay. There, that's what I want. This is another reason, though, why I think ultimately the Cold War allegory is mistaken. Because the relationship between Genli and Estraven is at its heart not about competition, but about cooperation, about about interdependence and the necessity of there being, of course, as in this symbol, the yang yin symbol. It's interesting that Le Guin calls it the yang yin symbol. I'm usually more familiar, I think, with hearing it the other way around. So if anybody has any ideas about that, I'd love to hear it. But I think that this quotation from Le Guin, which is from a blog post actually that she did in 2015, it wasn't specifically about Left-Handed Darkness, but I think it actually informs many of her novels, but including this one. In the yang yin symbol, each half contains within it a portion of the other, signifying their complete interdependence and continual intermutability. The figure is static, but each half contains the seed of transformation. The symbol represents not a stasis, but a process. And I think, to conclude, we see that also play out in the very title of the novel itself. The Left Hand of Darkness. What does it refer to? Well, it doesn't come up in the novel very often, as you might know. But when it does, I think it is part of this overall symbolic apparatus. Here, for example, is what's known as Tormer's Lay. It's a song recited by Esterven to Genli Ai when they are in the middle of their 800-mile trek through the blizzard. Light is the left hand of darkness, and darkness the right hand of light. Two are one, life and death lying together like lovers in Kemmer, like hands joined together, like the end and the way. The left hand of darkness, in other words, even though our associations with left-handedness and darkness are perhaps usually considered to be negative, for Le Guin are only part of a bigger whole, the yin yin. However, whatever sort of binarisms, binary oppositions, contradictions, conflicts that one wants to imagine that the world is made up of, ultimately Le Guin's vision helps us see that all of those parts are necessary, even the ones that are most oppositional. In fact, she makes me think of a Romantic poet, William Blake, who said, opposition is true friendship. And I think in many respects, that is a major lesson that we learn, but that we learn with a great deal of pleasure and interest in Le Guin's book. I'll stop there. Thank you. Definitely have some time for questions. And if you don't have questions, I have many more slides. Yes.
I think I've noticed some similarities in personality between Le Guin and Atwood.
And apparently Atwood made mention of her friendship with Le Guin last night.
Yeah, I heard that. Do you find any similarities between their writing, especially Atwood's more science fiction type writing?
Right. You know, I think it's interesting that Atwood has been real over the course of her career quite resistant to being called a science fiction author, to identifying as a science fiction author in a way that Le Guin certainly was never reluctant to be. So that I don't know how important a difference that is, but that strikes me immediately as sort of Le Guin embraces science fiction in a way that Atwood, who clearly writes it extremely well, is nevertheless uncomfortable with it at some level. I think also I would say from what I've read, and I'm not yet an expert who's fully read the oeuvres of total oeuvres of either of these authors. Le Guin's vision is I would say again sort of more integrative than Atwood's. Maybe that makes Atwood more of the realist, ironically, and unfortunately. Atwood's vision in The Handmaid's Tale, of course, is not at all a yang yin vision, not at all a vision in which male and female principles correspond and fulfill what the other lacks. I think we need both. I think we need both kinds of authors. And I'm sure that somebody else could answer the question and find a whole lot more similarities between them too.
Thank you.
I never quite figured out what the Mad Monarch thing about in the Left Hand of Darkness. How does that connect to the rest of the novel?
Yeah, the Mad Monarch, right, is the Mad King of Karhide, right, who turns out to be not quite as mad as he appears.
Or they, because they're not male or female.
They, and you know what? And that I have slides about that. Of course, that is one of the things that Le Guin initially defended about the novel, and then later on in Is Gender Necessary Redux, admitted she could have done better. That she does use the masculine pronoun throughout to describe characters who are supposed to be androgynous 5/6 of the time. And that's a good example of Le Guin revising her own position, saying, I was wrong. I could have done this differently, and people were right to criticize this. So thank you for the correction. Yeah, I mean, this is where I think that any allegorical reading of the novel creates more limitations than it gives us insight. To the extent that the King of Karhide represents an overly powerful executive branch that does not seem to be functioning along any kind of ethical lines.
Ooh, that's scary.
Gosh, I don't know where couldn't have any relevance to today. No. And yet, I mean, but again, I'm not in any way, shape, or form suggesting that Le Guin is predictive. I think Le Guin generally rejected the idea that science fiction should be judged on its sort of predictive capability as a basis. That was not her bag at all. I think in both cases, with the to wrap up, with the governments of and the sort of political structures of both countries, we're meant to see that neither is a perfect situation. Orgorian, which initially seems to be a country that's going to be much more open to joining the Ecumen, turns out to be just as embroiled in infighting and politicking, despite the fact that in some ways it appears to be the more modern of the two countries. Karhide, on the other hand, is a monarchy, and yet it's a monarchy where the Mad King turns out in the end to be able to do the right thing, not necessarily for the right reasons, but ultimately it's Orgorian where Genli Ai is of course imprisoned and not Karhide.
Question though, both of those cities have themes of passivity. The populace in both places, I found that a little surprising when she emphasized that so much, that all the main actors in one of the places were they were smart, they were outgoing, but the basic populace was just not interested. They were dull. They were so. I'm just going to ask you what you think she was trying to say then about the effect of these different regimes.
Yeah.
People, or
Yeah.
what's happening? I don't understand why the people are so out to lunch.
I think that's a nice point. I haven't really thought about that, to be honest with you. I think one way to maybe think about it is to see that precisely because both forms a sort of traditional monarchy and some kind of sort of quasi committee-run bureaucracy like Orgorian, since they're both imperfect, and one of the ways in which they're both imperfect is that in both cases the populace is, as you say, disempowered and cut off from any sense of meaningful participation in the political process. to that extent, then a pox on both their houses.
But then, you just made me think that, there are these smaller enclaves, the end dwellings.
Yes,
So they are in contrast then to these more complex civilizations. And maybe she's saying there's many actually little villages and things that are doing quite well.
yeah, I think that's right. And of course, there are so many subtleties in this novel that I've only been able to sort of trace a sort of big picture. The devil, but the enjoyable devil is in the details, as in the footnotes, and of course in all of these ways in which Le Guin complicates what initially appears to be a very obvious binary opposition.
Speaking of the binary, when she was criticized for not doing better with the pronouns, and she finally said, "Oh, I could have done better." Did she come up with her brilliance? Did she come up with a pronoun other than they and them?
Let's see. Here's one of the slides that I didn't get to. Then and what we see here is on the left is what she originally wrote in 1976, and then on the right is what she wrote in 1988. That's a good question. In 76, she gives a very here it is. In 76, she defends her choice along some pretty traditional, conventional lines, and this is a very timely discussion to have, right? Given the fact that there does seem to be so much resistance still today to acceptance of pronouns that are not traditional and that do not fit into a neat binary of he and she. But she does, you'll notice that by the end of the 1976 passage, she does admit that, well, I mean, again, and I'm not sure if she's right about this, and I'm not sure she sticks to this. In 76, she says, the pronouns wouldn't matter at all if I had been cleverer at showing the female component of the Gathenian characters in action. But then look at the end of the passage, the corresponding passage in 1988. If I had realized how the pronouns I used shaped, directed, controlled my own thinking, I might have been cleverer.
I'm asking for her to be clever and come up with a pronoun that works.
Does anybody know?
If she had used a non-standard pronoun or just they or whatever, would that have been the only thing people talked about when they talked about this book?
Yeah, I mean, and let's not forget that we're talking about a book written in, 1976, 9, one or the other, late 1970s. Ahead of its time, one way or the other. It's an interesting point. There are certainly other science fiction authors who create many varieties of pronouns. I can't say for certain whether Le Guin does that in another novel or not. I have to. I'll get back to you on that.
I have another question. So when I started reading the book, I thought, okay, they're men, sometimes they change into women and they change back. So that is not, interestingly, not what she's talking about. More like female and male are present in every person.
Right.
And she
right. And
from different angles, but I think.
And she admits that she could have done a better job representing that, because I do think that was her intention. But I also think that, as was suggested earlier, the representation of gender fluidity in the novel is already so ahead of its time that perhaps she was perhaps wise not to try to push ahead in too many directions simultaneously.
So I've been listening to
Oh, great.
books on CD.
So you
Got here from this wonderful library.
can correct my pronunciation then.
Yes. And I just want to say that I don't know how they research the pronunciation of the word, but the word orgarain, they call orgarain.
Orgarin.
Orgarain, and I think that's.
Yeah,
She probably wrote the book while she was living in Oregon.
Oregon, right.
Full of rain.
Yep, that's a terrific point. I certainly know that, right, one of her most famous short stories, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. Omelas is Salem, backwards. Which apparently she did see on a road sign, and inspired that, so, yes, a local hero indeed.
All right.
Thank you.